Welcome, fans, to another edition of the Great North Wrestling Podcast. My name is Jack Kilby, Executive Vice President of Great North Wrestling. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome, for part two, ECW original ring announcer, amongst many other endeavors, Mr. Stephen Deangelis. How are you tonight, Stephen?
I'm good, Jack. How are you? Other than the fact that the air quality in New York is not very good today.
Yes.
I'm good.
Yes, very, very much so here as well. We're struggling to get through this. I hope it all abates quickly.
You've been dealing with it for days before we even got hit by it. So
yeah,
has a lot of it passed for you, or?
Well, it's we're in Eastern Ontario here, but it's sort of gone down to the Greater Toronto area now. The wind has sort of shifted, right. So we're a little bit better. But the government is warning us to be aware that we could have a lot of this summer, unfortunately.
Global warming is real, people.
Yeah, it is. It is what it is.
It's real.
The last time we were on the interview process, we stopped about the time I was going to get into your involvement in what really started the whole ECW tribute revival phenomenon, and that being the Hardcore Homecoming show. Could you talk about how you became involved in that and your experience there?
I got a phone call from Jeremy Borash and Shane Douglas asking me to be part of it. And of course I said yes. And very close to each other came the invitation to do the WWE ECW show, the one night stand. So I can't honestly remember which came first, though I think it was the most fun part of the WWE ECW event was they actually sent me a contract by mistake to wrestle on the show, which of course I called and I notified the office and I said, oh, by the way, but I still have a copy of that contract just to say I was offered a job to wrestle on pay-per-view. And I,
who was going to be your opponent, or was that?
I don't know. It didn't say. It just said, this is what we want to pay you. This is the deal. It was the same contract, except it said appear as wrestler.
That's incredible. What was the atmosphere like in the ECW arena for that show? I know on tape it came across as very, very genuine and very much a real ECW environment.
Well, it really felt like a high school reunion in the arena, especially since you knew where every fan virtually was going to be sitting. Hat Guy was going to be where Hat Guy was going to be, and Kato was going to be where Kato was going to be, and Lenny, the guy with the long black hair, was going to be where he was going to be, and everybody was exactly where they always were, and so that was very interesting to feel that bit of a throwback. The only difference, of course, is that you could walk in there and it was clean. It was like that arena has changed so much in the time, even since the first ECW pay-per-view. But it was thrilling to see everybody. It was great to have an opportunity, knowing that Terry Funk chose to be there, to be able to. I would have hated to have missed being involved in a show that had him involved in it. So the fact that I got to do both, I feel very blessed.
Absolutely. What were your impressions in terms of when there was a follow-up show that Shane was involved in, and then his eventual promotion, Extreme Rising, that right. I guess didn't for some reason didn't have legs. Did you get the impression that this was going to be another viable company?
It might have been, but I think having five guys, talking about the other promotion, having five guys at the top, and all of them being equal partners and equal say, no matter what you try to do, it's difficult to get people to stay in their lane. And so everybody is peeking over their shoulder, looking at what other people are doing, going, well, I would do this instead. And so I think that was a disservice, unfortunately, to Shane, because people who should have been doing just promotion were trying to get involved in the creative. And I don't know if that was just ego or trying to cut people out or just wanting more control or more credit or whatever. But it was a shame. And that those first shows, the show at the Armory where Sabu got taken to the hospital, and a couple of other unfortunate things that happened that night, that derailed them pretty quickly right away, because all you had was goodwill and credibility, and losing it with the fans that much, considering how hot they were coming in that day. If a couple of those things had not happened, we would have sold out. They would have sold out a return at the Armory, and they could have kept coming back. I think. I don't know that you would have been able to do monthly, but you gradually could have, instilled new blood and got a new generation, and done it in a much more healthier way than WWE tried to do, which was not to introduce the characters at all, but just to say, look, we told you these guys, they're indie guys and their ECW is not as good as we are. Let's squash them in 4 minutes on TV. So
yeah, and then wonder why it didn't take off to any degree.
Sure. Well, I think I may have said this before, is there's nothing like that emotional connection. I mean, that's what happened with Hardcore Homecoming. Was I don't think anybody dreamed that so many of the guys would be together and so many of the fans would be together, and that certainly didn't happen when WWE ECW went into the building to appear that one time that they were there, and they got, the show got booed out of the building because it didn't feel authentic to them. It felt like a betrayal. But there was not. But the Hardcore Homecoming show was great, and both of the Hammerstein shows were solid shows too. I mean, the more it became obvious that WWE was going to have more sway and integrate more of their guys, because I don't think they believed that the ECW guys were big enough stars to get attention, which of course is ridiculous because you look at, the sales of that DVD, and you sold out all those DVDs, and all of a sudden those sales figures disappeared from the roster of sales figures because they didn't want it known that the ECW DVD was outselling their own pay-per-views.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions. Given the way that they marginalized the WWE ECW with the success of not only the initial ECW DVD, but the subsequent volumes, they made millions from that. I find that hard to kind of rationalize how they treated the original ECW product that they were making so much money on, and then when they restarted it, marginalized all the original guys for the most part.
Well, I think somehow either Vince came up with this idea himself, or someone convinced him that this was the case. But Vince would say the only reason the fans chant for ECW is because he trained them to do it. He believed that he was the reason, which meant that he could control it or make it stop or divert it or repackage it. And we all know that wasn't the case. But I think he really believes that to this day. I don't think it could ever dawn on him that and I think there's got to be a little bit of professional jealousy. I mean, those fans would come. I mean, if you saw people show up at 10, 11 o'clock in the morning for an 8 o'clock show, that wouldn't happen anywhere. It barely happens WrestleMania weekend. And the tailgating parties, and people who would drive from Maine, people who would drive from the Carolinas every month, people who would drive from Ohio. I mean, it was not. While the shows in Philadelphia were in Philly, that fan base was a wide fan base. Everyone traveled,
including fans like myself that traveled from north of Toronto to Swanson and Rittner. I definitely think you have something there. Do you think that Vince putting the WWE ECW title on himself, which many of us groaned in disgust, was a blatant attempt to kill that love for the product?
No, I think Vince thought, okay, the fans are turning off. The viewership is not growing. What he didn't realize was the reason it wasn't growing was because he wasn't giving the fans what they wanted. And I think he also, there was a woman named Bonnie Hamber who was at USA Network at the time, who was also involved with TV. And she was always in Vince's ear saying, we need more McMahons on television. If the ratings are going down, just put more McMahons on TV. And so I think Vince thought that he was a name enough that wasn't involved in other storylines across, on the other brands, that he could do something with it. And I think he was obviously wrong.
What are your thoughts on the Forever Hardcore and Barbwire City DVDs? The latter produced by Jeremy Borash, and what a tremendous success they were.
It just reiterates what we said: emotional connection. I also think that the ECW guys, because they were so grateful themselves for the opportunities they've been given, they opened themselves up to the fan. I mean, you watch the way those workers, the wrestlers, responded to questions in a real, authentic way. Nothing was cookie cutter. Nothing was prepackaged. They weren't prepared for the question. They actually thought about the question and answered them, and I think that gained them the respect.
And Sabu, that was one of the first interviews I can remember on Forever Hardcore that he actually broke character and spoke, which was quite revolutionary at the time.
Right. Well, I think he knew that there will be an attempt to rewrite history, and obviously the person who's got the biggest megaphone gets an opportunity to do that. And I think he wanted to speak up for his legacy.
Did you happen to catch Sabu recently on AEW TV?
I did, and it was great seeing him. I wish there were other ways they might have used him that would have benefited him better. But it's not my dime, it's not my checkbook. And they were trying to listen. All those matches, they try to get a lot in. You have so many participants, you have to plan it, but I wish that they had just taken more time and treated him more like the legend. I wish the heels I wish Jericho had time to register the fact that he had respect for Sabu, and that he was afraid of Sabu's unpredictability. Because they had a ready-made story there, because I think you know this, but Sabu and Jericho wrestled in the ECW arena. The only time they ever wrestled was the night that Tony Khan's dad brought him to the arena. So having them in the ring together means more. And if they could have captured that and just told that real story of the reason he wanted to get him in the ring and get him in the AEW, was because that cemented his desire to be a content creator. It would have raised the stakes, and it would have they could have done a better job with Sabu. I mean, I honestly thought when I saw Sabu, I thought, oh well, they're in Las Vegas, Rob's coming out, because Van Dam has a home there as well. I thought, well, they're gonna have Sabu come out, and then at some point have Rob come out, and then Rob could work with Sabu, and they could do something. But maybe they didn't think of it. Maybe there were already enough people in the match and didn't need more. But that's what I would have done. I would have given him somebody to work with, and not necessarily to be his Fonzie, but somebody who has true history with, that they could have utilized.
Yeah, one of the individuals who sacrificed the most for, I believe it was Foley, who said that Sabu was one of the, the guys that sacrificed the most but benefited the least. So it's great to see him. I've met him several times. What an incredibly nice guy. I just like to see him get his due and get some exposure on national television.
Yeah, if anyone deserved to be a millionaire, it's Sabu.
Yeah, 100%.
Considering how much he influenced so many people after him, if there was such a thing like in commercials, there were royalties and you get paid. Every time an actor, a worker does something that's influenced by Sabu, that wrestler should have to pay Sabu $1. He'd be, the money would just keep flowing in, because he's an incredible innovator, an incredible influence, and I'm glad that he's around enough and getting acknowledged. And there are people like you who provide a platform for people to talk about people who truly contributed, the same way that Public Enemy did. People don't really look at Public Enemy's contribution. They were, they and Sabu were very early on to open the door for a lot of different workers.
So many. So in 2013, I first met you in London, Ontario, for what was billed as ECW in Canada, and actually the name of the company was Hardcore Roadtrip. And you were not only the ring announcer there, but you were involved in the creative. And
there's a better story than that.
Okay, jump in.
So with that show, I was just the ring announcer, and I got there, and we're doing the autograph. Everyone's doing the autograph signing, and I'm noticing that a lot of guys who were announced weren't there, which meant a lot of the matches,
including Sabu.
Right, including Sabu. And that was a weird situation because, well, I'll talk about that in a second. But so what happened was I looked around and I was like, oh my God, we can't deliver on any of this stuff. So I went to the gentleman who I knew as Mark Livingston. And he's like, and he was shaking like a leaf. Like, what am I going to do? How am I going to put this together? And I said, listen, I'm taking a pad and a piece of paper and I'm sitting over in the corner. Leave me alone. I'm going to figure this out. I'll figure this out. I said, don't go to a committee and ask the guys, because all the guys are going to want to do is just put themselves over. I said, and they want their, because it helps the merch sales. I said, let me figure out how to structure something, which is how we got the whole idea of the tournament that night.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Because if not, I mean, we had easily 2/3 of the guys that were announced, and then I had to sit down and say to him, okay, who are you bringing back? Who can you afford to bring back? Because the guys you invest in, who can you build on here? Who's going to be available to you? I mean, he had a lot of guys, he'd booked them months and months in advance, but if you're running on a regular basis, you have to have guys who might be able to make a commitment to you moving forward and be available for the next show. Because what's the point of getting them to have a belt and then having to drop it or have another tournament or have them no show you? I said, it just devalues what you're doing. So I said, this is what I think. And he went, okay. and so we did it. And what was interesting about that is that, there'd been all this rumbling about, were people going to get paid? There was questions about his business practices in another Fed. Maybe it was 4 or 5 years previous. So I went to him and I said, so what's going on? He said, no, the money's all here. I said, you sure the money's all here? I said, the money's all here. So, and he said, in fact, I have everyone's money is in envelopes already prepared. So when we lined up, it was the fastest payday I'd ever seen at a show. We all went up. There was that little stage in Ontario, and the curtain was closed. We went up. We stood in line, and it was him and I believe his brother, and then a security guy who was holding the envelopes. And he went and handed people their envelopes, and they signed. The brother had a clipboard, and they signed the clipboard that they received their money. And we were out of there in 7 to 10 minutes, the whole locker room. And there were no questions. So when it came time to do the next one, why would you question it? He has the money. He knew he had, he sold out 2 shows. So he knew he had the money. He had ticket revenue for the show that got botched. Plus he had tickets for the third show, which we never saw, which we can talk about that, booking that. But at that point in time, after they were done and he was going back, he called me and he said, hey, listen, you did, can I have you do the next show? Well, can you officially, be the matchmaker? So I went through the second one. And I said, absolutely. I said, just tell me, who am I using from Canada and who am I using from the States? And then I spent months doing research on all the guys that I didn't know. And And also, I called them all on the phone and talked to each of them for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. What do you do? Where do you see yourself? Who are your influences? You know, what are you known as a heel or a face? What's your strengths? What's your weaknesses? What do you need to most work on? If someone were going to protect you, your presentation, what do you want to make sure someone does for you? And so I really strategized the whole thing. So we had the afternoon show and the evening show. I got word the night before, like at 1 o'clock in the morning, that I guess he could only afford to have Rhino on one show. So Rhino did the afternoon.
This is the 2014 version.
Yes, this is the second day. So Rhino did the afternoon and then drove home to Detroit. I mean, he was cool, and I forget who else it was. There was somebody else who only did the evening show. But like, he didn't have the money for Devon. And I said, if you don't have the money to pay Devon, you know, but see, I look at it as, okay, he's being fiscally responsible because he's doing the math and figuring out that, and then I couldn't figure it out because the place was sold out. And I'm like, okay, it's so how do you not have the money? You know, and then I thought, oh, okay, he needs the money to put the deposit down on the building for the third set of shows. And he needed to do that in advance before he could announce. So we screwed up. So I kept thinking, okay, there are rational reasons why this could happen. Because he'd had a payment of just being prepared and really paying and being organized and all those things. But it was interesting because, you know, I had set up very long-term plans there. Once he said to me, you're the guy, I said, well, here's what I want to do. I want to do 3 sets of shows in London, Ontario. And then the 4th show, so 3 times a year, find a bigger building. And there was an ice rink, if I remember correctly, that he had talked about booking. And we would do the bigger show in the ice rink. And so all the storylines would culminate towards the pay-per-view. And then maybe you could afford to bring in, whether they worked or autograph, whatever, bring in somebody like Terry Funk, who I talked about to Terry about coming in and just being like, you know, at ringside, or being the guy who stoozes off the heel for cheating and whatever, and then punches them or something. You know, something he was still capable of doing that. But I mean, you can see, I mean, if you ever look at the cards, how they, I guess I'll call it round 2, were laid out. You know, I specifically, you know, he wanted to do the real hardcore stuff. And I said, here's the deal. The real hardcore stuff are going to be like the equivalent of our lights out matches. The show is going to happen. There'll be an intermission of 10 minutes. So if anyone has families or kids there, they've got warning and they can take their family out. And this way, someone who's going to object to seeing that level of violence, they won't have to watch it. And so that's what we did on both shows. Was we took a break. And so it was almost, so they could do the kind of things and take advantage of the guys like Masada and these other guys who they had who could have delivered that. And even like the gals like Jules Malone and you know, who worked a more hardcore style, they could have done the kind of work they wanted to do. And so it seemed to be a perfect match. And then even building up, like having the whole thing of everyone thinking that the person that was sending messages to Angel, who'd won the belts, from the Baldies, who'd won the belt, was Raven. And then we did the whole thing of Angel being jumped, knocked out, handcuffed in the Raven pose in the turnbuckle, and then taking his helmet off, and it was Vito.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the idea would be that Vito and Angel trained together, and how come Vito didn't give him a shot or invite him to be there. And it was interesting because I don't know if you remember about the first show, but I had it arranged so that when Angel won the belt, the first guy in the ring to congratulate him was Vito. And Vito came in and hugged him, and Vito took the mic from him and put him over like crazy and said, "You don't understand. We trained you." So all that was the seed for the jealousy. So my intention was at the end of the whole thing, before the next set of shows, I would be able to do little sit-down interviews with them both, and also show Vito going into business for himself and the jealousy. And the plan is that Vito and Angel had both been Baldies together. So I wanted to figure out how I was going to have that match. And the plan was well, I couldn't get New Jack into Canada at the time, so that was off the table. So what I did was I had booked for the third set of shows. The only person who would have, I couldn't get anyone who would favor one over the other. Find someone who hated them both equally. So it was going to be Mustafa from the Gangsters was going to be the referee. So we'd play on the history and still get that emotional content. And then at that point in time, I was then going to involve DeVito and Mike and do the whole, and get the Carnage crew in, get the other Baldies and do that. And so the things that we could have explored character-wise that would have been really interesting. That third set of shows, I had, he had not really spent much time up in Canada, but I had Ray Phoenix was booked. Mm-hmm. Ray Phoenix was booked. Ray Horus, who was booked, who had been working up until that time as Rey Mysterio Jr. We're going to be, so I was going to bring Lucha up. For the Papa Don was going to be on that show. I had a whole New York contingent. Alex Reynolds and John Silver were going to be teaming on that show. So I was really building guys to come up, but I also had other guys like Dewey Murray, who was an indie guy who happened to have this very interesting, he could do a lot of vocal impersonations. So I wanted to do a whole thing where he would get a blow to the head every match and then forget who he was and think he was somebody else. And that would have been his gimmick all the time. And I had that going on. I had, Congo Kong was going to be a regular, and he was going to be like the 911. Send two guys out, do a stinker of the match, and the fans would chant for him to go in there and destroy them both. So I had some guys who were going to be parallels of those guys, because the Philly company had folded. Luke Hawx was available, so I brought Luke Hawx up to do an angle and stuff.
With the belt.
What?
With the belt.
The belt.
Yep.
And Jay Chung, who's married to Josh Alexander now, was coming up, and she was going to be the Francine of the whole. So I had people who were sort of in parallel tracks. It could be used in certain ways that we knew worked and would appeal to that base on some level. Not rip them off, but be role players in the bigger scheme of things.
So back to the first show, to give the fans an idea of the talent that actually showed up there. The poster had everyone from Axel Rotten, Sandman, Stevie Richards, Raven, but the actual talent that were there, for an indie show, looking back on it, is just amazing. I'm thinking of Scott Steiner, Raven, Al Snow. We had Balls Mahoney. Who else?
Petey Williams.
Yes, Petey Williams. So you had this really stacked card, and you did the double show, very financially successful. So the next year, of which I actually got paid to do security for Livingston, we had a similar lineup of big name stars: Rhino, Angel, my partner on Shooting from the Hip podcast, was defending the title. Devon, as you said, was advertised, and there's some that I'm missing. But when did you get an inclination? I mean, aside from Devon, I remember Devon was allegedly headed to the airport and then pulled around. But
well, that's because I said I'm not doing the show unless you call Devon to tell him that there's a chance that he wouldn't be. I said I'm not. I said I'm leaving. I'm going to the airport.
Okay.
You know? So I was like, okay, I'm not. If you think that there's not, because he was the only one who he said I may not have enough to pay Devon, and I said, well, no, Devon's coming up here because he's trusting us all, the guys who have been here before, and so I said you can't do that to him, and you can't do that to his relationships with the guys in the locker room who had vouched for the last time.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? So I said, it was more about his being able to keep his friendship and respect to the people who had said, yeah, come, it's fine, we're cool, we're going to see you. Come in. Had to make sure that they did that. And so he called. He got on the phone and called. And to me, I thought, okay, that's a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So he called. But so I had no inkling, and there were certain people who were only on the afternoon show. They got paid. Rhino got paid. They had an envelope for Rhino. Rhino got paid. And there were a couple of other people who were only in the afternoon show and had evening gigs. Oh, Jimmy Jacobs was supposed to be on the third show. Jimmy Jacobs was supposed to be on the third set of shows. Scarlett Bordeaux was supposed to be on the third set of shows. Like, I had really curated people who were really underexposed, but really could offer something you could grow with. And obviously their history in the business and their contributions with other companies have proven that out. And it was interesting. And then we did the show, and all of a sudden I'm looking around. I'm like, okay, we're in the middle of the second show. And I was like, where's Mark? And they're like, oh, he's at the hospital. He's at the hospital. So we tried calling, and we tried calling his wife, and we tried calling, and no response, no anything. So one of the local wrestlers knew a woman who was a fan, who was a nurse, who was an ER nurse. So she called all the closest hospitals, and he was nowhere to be found. Never showed up. Wasn't even smart enough to go and like show up at the emergency room and complain. So, and he disappeared for days.
I think forever, unless I'm mistaken. I remember at the show went through, the main event happened, and then I distinctly recall a situation where you thought at one point that the wrestlers were holding you accountable for the disappearing show, or is that incorrect?
No. What happened is that the guys know me and they know whatever. But what happened was we had taken the break, and then they went to go do the hardcore match. And it was during the hardcore match in that intermission we found out that he had allegedly gone to the hospital
with the cash box,
with whatever, he had just totally, he and his wife had hightailed it. So actually it was Angel and Vito who were concerned about the people who didn't know me. And so it was Angel and Vito who said, we're gonna speak up, because we have to let people know, because we know, because they knew, and they knew the truth, and they were there largely because they're friends. So when stuff would happen, I was complaining all day, about different things. So they would have caught wind. They're sophisticated enough and strong enough to, smart enough to know. And so they were the ones who went ahead and said, hey, this has nothing to do with this has nothing to do with Steven. Steven's just, on the creative side, because I didn't get paid for anything I did that weekend. I didn't get paid. We had agreed for me to book the show and to book the next set of shows. I mean, I already had calls out, and we were working it out, and people were going to drive. Oh, we had that contingent that came up from New York who were students of the SATs, Mike Verna and those guys, and Talon, and a couple, and they had a good time, except that they had to turn around and drive back, and we need to make sure they had enough gas money to get back, because they thought, oh, we'll have our money and we'll go back. But I will say the fans there were amazing, because when we got on the mic and we were like, listen, we got to get these guys back to the airports. The only thing that was really that happened, which I told everybody in advance, just because I know the way these things are, and if they're not made a priority, I always had a thing where if I get sent a ticket, I want both sides of the ticket. Whether it was for ECW or for TNA or for any other independent show, you get the round trip ticket. I said, make sure you get your round trip ticket. Because if the guys distracted at all, because some of them had tried to book late night flights out. So they were barely going, if they were going to make it, or they were going to try to see if they could get on an earlier flight than the next morning. If you wait around, you're definitely not getting that flight. So that was, everyone had their round trip tickets, thank God. And the fans were amazing getting people. And I will say, the guys who were looking for more exposure than money, like the SAT students and those guys, the fans in London, Ontario were amazing. They went and took those guys out for dinner after the show, like bought them food, ordered them pizzas. They made sure everybody who hadn't eaten outside of catering backstage at the event got to, got something to eat and taken care of, and taken to the airport, and made sure that they got on their plane and wouldn't leave the airport until they did. And we're talking about probably 20 some odd different fans did it. I mean, that to me makes me just want to. I've not been back since, but I'd love to have a reason to come back, just because that reminded me of the spirit of like the ECW fans.
Yeah,
the London fans were as authentic as sort of ECW type experience as we were trying to evoke there, and with the Hardcore Roadtrip. The thing that probably gave it its heart, because I always thought ECW was always about heart, was the fans. And of course, isn't it ironic that it were the fans of London, Ontario, who helped replicate that same thing, which Vince would pay $1 zillion to be able to replicate and could never.
Yeah, it was certainly a very special moment in terms of that communal atmosphere. I remember Angel got on the stick and rallied the troops, so to speak, and said, you're absolved of any, malfeasance here. And then the fans just seem to automatically come into line and help with the trans and all that sort of stuff. And I think that moment itself, aside from not getting paid myself and all the, I mean, what a shame in terms of the action, the stars that were there. My memories jogged again, and I remember Chavo Guerrero Jr. was there,
signing for a guy who sold toys and action figures and stuff. So it was a signing appearance more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
But Chavo was there too.
And Nunzio was there, who is appearing. Guido, who is appearing on July the 15th in Smith Falls, Ontario, against the Blood Hunter for Great North Wrestling. So it was a very it would have been, I think about often what could have been with that promotion. It definitely had legs. It had motivation. It had, your creative. The creative was excellent. The storylines, the action, but then, as so often happens in the wrestling business, something goes sour. Did you ever hear I know you never got paid. I never got paid. Everybody didn't get paid. But did you ever hear what happened to Mr. Livingston? Or
No,
no?
no, did you? I mean, I know. Like a week later, a bunch of the guys showed up at his house and found him there. The
Oh wow.
Canadian guys, and they went there, and he tried to pay them off to go away. And I know a couple of the guys were like, "I'm not taking your money until you give us the money for everybody." They wanted to buy them off to leave him alone and not stooge that he was home. And they're like, "Oh, you kidding me? We're telling everybody where you live. We're putting your..." And so they put his phone number and address up on the internet. I think they sent emails out to everybody saying, "This is where he lives. This is his wife's number. This is where she works. This is what he. This is the whole thing." But it was very it was sad because it didn't have to be. I mean, we sold out show 3A and 3B. We sold out 2A and 2B. Like there was, I mean, I was always with him going, okay, what's the budget? So I knew what the profit margin was. He didn't come close. I knew what he paid for the building. I knew what he paid for the sound system. I made him give me a total budget because I didn't want him to overextend himself. And so I have, if I could find it, unfortunately, it's up in a box somewhere among like 100 boxes in Rhode Island at my dad's. I have all my notebooks from all those ideas. So if I find them ever, I will reach back to you and we can go through it all. And I won't get into how much people were getting paid, but I will say, but it was easily, you could tell, like, it was like, we have this amount of money for this match. We have this amount of money for this match. We have this for this. We're building this guy. Let's do this. And it was a crime that it didn't go further.
I agree for sure. But on the plus side, it was an interesting experience to say the least. And I've made some excellent contacts. That was really my first foray into the business with yourself and Angel, who I do a podcast with. So
please send him my regards.
I will. There's always a plus side. Have a fan question wanting to know about your memories of Hardcore Justice 2010 for TNA.
I had a great time. Terry Taylor called me and said, "Hey, we want you coming down to Florida to do this." I found out Tommy was booking, so I was like, "Great." But it was very interesting. The thing that was interesting about that pay-per-view is that previously, I just got the match listings, and eventually I got a script with ECW, with the ECW WWE thing. I had a script. In fact, I'll one other little spoiler. At the end of the first ECW pay-per-view, there was in the script, and they never shot it and it never aired. There was a clip of Paul and Vince backstage, and Vince turning to Paul and saying, "Gee, Paul, maybe ECW isn't dead after all." But I guess Vince didn't want to do it or didn't. But I think that was their way of trying to sneak that in and see if they could have the fans clamor for it. So I think that, but no, we had a production meeting, and I remember going down, and we were there the day before. It was great seeing everybody, and then there was a production meeting, and generally, I was never invited to be part of the production meetings. So Tommy said, "I want you in the production meeting." So we were there, and we went through the whole show, and they had a sound gal named Stevie. So a redheaded gal who you may have seen in the background, a lot of TNA stuff, and now AEW. But I would give her things like, "Okay, since you're not familiar with these guys' entrances, when they're done doing whatever they're going to do up on the ropes or whatever, when I put my arm behind my back, that's your cue to bring the volume down on their music and get ready to do." So if you watch that pay-per-view at all, or even any old ECW, you can see me giving cues always to the sound guy, putting my arm behind my back. So we were there, and I remember Terry Taylor, I believe it was, said, we're afraid to use Just Incredible. We're afraid to use Balls Mahoney. What are we going to call them? And so I jokingly said, well, he's got big cojones. You can call it cojones, but spell it like Mahoney. And so that's where that came from, as bad an idea as that was. And then, just doing the PJ Polacco thing.
I was going to say that moniker for Balls was one of the most memorable parts of the podcast. The way Taz kept lampooning it. I thought that was entertaining.
Well, because we listen. You deal with the cards you're dealt with. It was very interesting though, because they had wanted. There was a certain segment of TNA. They were part of the regular TNA team that wanted to sort of diminish and make ECW look lesser than. And they wanted to do a vignette with me. And I liked this person very much. And I was around when he was breaking the business and used to sneak in backstage at shows to do interviews for his own stuff, Jeremy Borash. And they wanted to do a vignette with Jeremy Borash teaching me how to introduce the ECW guys. And I was like, and I told Tommy, I said, Tommy, that's not happening. I said, that's just not happening. I said, that's just not happening. I said, first of all, no one should be talking to me at all. I said, if any of the guys in the locker room, give someone else an interview. Get them over. They might have a job here at TNA. Give them a chance to have a job here, and help their matches, help their evening here. So I just sort of made sure that didn't happen. Go ahead.
Were there, as you know, after that, the sort of ECW, I forget what they call it, EV 2.0 or whatever it was.
Extreme Violence 2.0, yeah.
That continued. Were you involved in the product after that, or was there any plans?
Not a bit. And I think that was EV 2.0, from what I understand, was a Bischoff idea in terms of a name for the group. But I think it was their way of, once the pay-per-view is over, let's use them and get them out of there. Get those guys out of here. Because if they disappear, then they've just disappeared, and the fans will clamor for them. Let's do something and kill them off, and that was a shame. They could have done better with it. So
after the Hardcore Road Trip situation, we had spoken, and you had indicated that you were thinking at one time of being involved in another promotion or another wrestling venture. Did you think better of that? And have you had any desire since?
No one comes. Listen, I don't think people know my background as a creative person in the entertainment industry. And if they did, they would figure out why it might make sense to have me more involved. But I would only, it's funny. I think a lot of people only want to be involved if they can come and go, or do one shots here and there. I only would want to regularly be involved if I could be regularly, like if I could really commit to help build something and help people build their careers. Because that's what I do in my career as a casting director. And as a director, I help build people's careers. I want to use that same skill set for wrestlers to help them, people who work hard and are deserving, to get their best shot at it. So, I come and go if someone asks me to do something, and I like the promoter and I like the locker room. As I said, I'm going to be back for MLW on July 8th in Philly. And it'll be great to be in that building again. And there are a ton of guys who I've never worked with ever, because it's been over a year since last time I was there, worked for MLW, was in Texas for a TV taping that was March of last year. And then I was not involved, and a lot of things go into that, which is Like when they do BN Sports, very often they want an announcer there who's a BN Sports person. They have people on contracts, so they just say, "Hey, BN Sports is paying for this guy to be here. We don't have to pay for an announcer."
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, well, I understand that, or they want something like there was a time where they wanted somebody who was bilingual, who later they could dub, and he could dub all his stuff, all the introductions in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why sometimes you see me on MLW and you see me in the ring, and sometimes you don't see me in the ring, but you hear me still announcing. That's because they're going to eventually, when they release it for the Spanish programming arm, they're going to dub over it. They're going to dub over me, and seeing me do it in the ring and putting the focus on me just draws attention to the fact that they don't really have a Spanish ring announcer there.
So, Steven, you've touched on your MLW work upcoming. Why don't you hit that one more time and let the fans know where they can find you on social media?
Okay, so on social media, I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook, though I don't really have a lot of room for friends because of my various careers and various projects. But Instagram is a way to reach me. And I'm pretty good. Somebody reached out to me today on Instagram and wanted to talk to me, wanted to interview me, and I was like, okay, sure. So I do read, I do read everything. It's a matter of when, but I do read everything, and if I can respond, I respond. And on Saturday, July the 8th, from the old ECW arena, 2300 arena, on Fight Plus. They're doing a TV taping the first hour from 7 to 8. Then 8 o'clock, they go live for what I guess would be an internet pay-per-view through Fight Plus. And the card's shaping up to be very interesting. Hammerstone versus Alex Kane for the MLW title. Raven's new group, The Calling, is fighting the Samoan SWAT team, the new Samoan SWAT team, for the titles. And as I said, there's a lot of great new talent that I've not, Mance Warner's on the show. There are a lot of guys who I really admire and really enjoy seeing their work. And and you have to remember, like, before there was an AEW, the people you were seeing in MLW, you were seeing MJF, you were seeing Sammy, you were seeing Darby. All the guys who are now the pillars and basis of AEW were all in, they were all working for Court Bauer. So I always look at it as a good sign. Court's got his eye on somebody. Within a year or two, someone else is going to grab him.
Exciting stuff. And I want to thank you again for coming on the Great North Wrestling Podcast again and getting to the bottom of the Hardcore Road Trip situation. Again, it's maybe I'm one of few who remembers or whatnot, but it certainly was an interesting experience and provided me as a future promoter some don'ts and definitely some do's.
It was just sad because it didn't need to be. It didn't need to be. And I still wrap my head around it. I mean, has anyone ever heard of Livingston or wherever his?
Not a thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, all I could think of. I mean, somebody had told me from up there that they thought that he had borrowed money to do the shows, and that he might not. That he might have had an issue with paying them back.
Well,
I may have borrowed more money than he could afford to pay back, and so he had to take the gate, and he had to take the next month's gate in order to get himself out of hot water. And that's only someone had tossed that to me as speculation, but it's as good a possibility as anything else we have because none of it makes sense.
No, Again, what could have been for sure. There definitely was potential there, but
I'm just sorry that people didn't have their camera phones out more and have more footage because those are some very cool angles. That whole thing with Raven and Vito is one of my favorite things. When he came out and when Vito came out and the fans didn't know who it was, and then he struck the pose, the place popped like it was Raven. And then when he did the reveal that it was Vito, the place went crazy, because I always think that fans want to be smart to the business, but I think they'd love nothing more than to be innocent to the business.
Well, definitely love surprises, right?
Yeah, that's right, for sure. And also just in terms of directions of where characters are going and where matches are going, and I think it's proven by the way that the whole Bloodline storyline is working out, in WWE. The only thing, everyone says, oh, COVID was so horrible. Yeah, it was horrible. But you know what? We wouldn't have the Bloodline storyline if it hadn't been for the pandemic. Because there were no live fans, they had to do things in a more cinematic way backstage. And that made them play moments between the characters as opposed to playing it to get a reaction from the audience. And so I think that changed the face of the business. So while it hurt promoters financially, I think it proved a point that there are other interesting ways to present your product and build the brands and the relationships between the characters.
Couldn't agree more. And I want to thank you, Stephen, for appearing again on the Great North Wrestling Podcast. And we'll definitely check in again after your deal in July, and good luck.
Yeah, thank you, man. Thank you, Jack. Have a good day.
Take care.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV for